So what are the different types of technical things that you have to do in your project? We call them development processes. And that's in contrast to management processes. These are fancy words that you need to know. It's a good thing to know them. If, for example, you're familiar with the PMBOK guide, it's all about processes, but those are management processes in contrast to development processes. Now, the type of things that you have to do depends on the type of project that you have. If it's going to be an IT project, then these are the typical activities that you have. Activity is not the best word to use here. Let's call them development processes. Okay. For those of you who are not working in IT projects, I'm going to give you a quick review of those. Analyze is where you try to understand the requirements, try to understand the problems that the customer has, problems that you're going to solve. In the design process, you try to see how you can solve those problems. You create the architecture for your software. In construct, you will create those functions, those units that solve the problems. Think of something like Microsoft Word. There we have functions related to printing, related to creating tables, to formatting text, and so on. Each of them requires a process for constructing them, creating the code for that. And yet, we have to integrate them. Because things work very well as long as you're testing them as isolated things, but when you put them together as one piece of software, then there are many strange problems. That's integration. And of course, I also mentioned testing. We have many different types of testing. Unit testing, that's only about isolated features. Integration testing, regression testing, user acceptance testing. There are many different types of them. Now, for those of you who are working in other types of project, you can see how you can create development processes for your project probably, but it's never as simple and straightforward as IT projects normally, at least for the type of projects that I know. In a process plan project, for example, you have development processes such as basic design, then you have detailed design and procurement for each of your units. Then you construct and assemble and install each unit. Then you have some type of unit test isolated from other things. And then type of integrated test with the load and everything else. And still, these development processes for a process plan doesn't explain everything that you have to create there. You have other things, for example, the building inside which you will have those units and so on. But that's okay. By the way, in this course, we're going to use examples for IT development. And a reason is that IT development is the best example of where you can use Agile projects. That's actually one of the topics that we're going to have if it's possible to use Agile in other types of projects. So for now, let's think about IT development. So these are the development processes. Now I have a more important question. How can we run these processes? In which order? With what type of life cycle? Another fancy word. Okay. There are two types of generic life cycles. Let me see if you can think about both of them. Take your time. I'm here. Okay. I have time. Okay. This is one type. It's very simple, very straightforward. We run the development processes one at a time. We start with analyzing. We try to understand all the requirements that the customer has. Then we design everything, create the whole architecture for the software. Then we create all units, all functions. That's the construct process. Then we will integrate all of them. We will run into many problems in that process, and then we will test and try to solve them. This is simplified, of course, because those of you who are into this type of industry, this type of project, know that there are different types of tests and you have to run them in different stages here. But that's fine. Let's keep it simple. In here, we have different deliverables, if you will. At the end of the analyze process, we will have an understanding of the scope of the project. You can document the scope, and that can also be used in your contract. Then at the end of the design process, we will have the architecture for the project. And related to that, at the end of analyze, we can also have a high-level plan for the project because we have a good understanding of what we are going to create. But still, the details depend on your design. That's about how you're going to create the solution. So at the end of the design stage or design process, you can create a detailed plan for your project. And that's usually the thing that you will use throughout your project to achieve what you have in mind. And one common problem is that people create a detailed plan there and they don't change it at all. That's not the type of plan that we need in projects. That doesn't work. A plan should always be adjusted, updated, and so on. It's a living document. We have other deliverables in this type of project. At the end of construct and integrate, we will have pieces of code. And at the end of the project, we'll have the product. That's a product that we can give to the customer or to the end users and let them use them. There's a difference between product and code. That's important. The product has to be ready to be used. It has to be complete. It has to make sense. But what we have at the end of the construct process is a number of isolated pieces of code. It's not a product. Okay. We need to have a name for this. And one of the most important characteristics in this type of life cycle is that we try to predict everything in the beginning of the project. We try to predict the product that we have to create. We try to predict the quality requirements, the time needed, the cost, and so on. That's the plans that we have here. And because of that, it is called a predictive life cycle. That's our first type of generic life cycle. In practice, of course, we never have things like this in sequence. We always have overlaps. That's fine. That's still the same kind of life cycle because we have the concept of prediction in the beginning of the project. We have upfront plan, upfront design, and upfront specification. For simplicity, from now on, we won't think about having overlaps and we'll think of this life cycle like this. Okay? All right. Now, we have one issue here. Do you see the product? It's created all the way at the end of the project. Now, if you want to create a building, it's fine. The supplier and the customer can get together, think about the building that they want, design something on paper, specify different things, and at the end, what the supplier gives to the customer is almost what the customer wanted. That works, that's fine. But there are some types of projects out there, yes, IT development, where it doesn't matter how much time you spend in the beginning of the project thinking about what you need. If the customer is going to see the product only at the end of the project, you will be in trouble. Because based on experience, it doesn't work on paper. They have to see the product. That's when they realize what they really want. That's a problem that we have. And when it is created at the end of the project, we have a big problem because that's too expensive to change the product at that point. Because of this, it's a good idea if we can have a different life cycle for this type of project. So, can you think of a different life cycle that solves this problem? We'll talk about it in the next lesson.